Welcome to this meeting of the Standing Senate Committee on National Security, Defence and Veterans Affairs. I'm Tony Dean, representing the province of Ontario, the chair of the committee, and I'm joined by fellow committee members who I now invite to introduce themselves, starting with our deputy chair.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Jean-Guy Dagenet du Québec.
Eric Boisvenu du Québec.
Welcome, Marty Deacon, Ontario.
Ann Couture, Nova Scotia.
Peter Beam, Ontario.
Donna Dasco-Sandler from Ontario.
Thank you, colleagues. To my left is the committee's clerk, Ms. Erica DuPont. For those watching the session, we're continuing our discussion of Bill C21, an act to amend certain acts and to make certain consequential amendments, all respecting the regulation of firearms in Canada. Today we're hearing from two panels of wildlife federations and firearm owners associations. In our first panel, we have the pleasure of welcoming by video conference, on behalf of the Fédération québécoise des chasseurs et pêcheurs, Marc Renaud, the president. On behalf of the Saskatchewan Wildlife Federation, Gil White, Recreational Firearm Community Chairperson, and on behalf of Yukon Fish and Game Association, Mr. Eric Schroff, Executive Director. Thank you all for joining us today. We invite you to provide your opening remarks, which will be followed by questions from our members. I remind you that you each have 5 minutes for your testimony, and we begin today with Mr. Marc Renaud. Mr. Renaud, you may begin whenever you're ready.
Monsieur le Président, membre du Comité sénatorial permanent de la Sécurité nationale, je m'adresse à vous en tant que président de la Fédération québécoise des chasseurs et pêcheurs, un organisme à but non lucratif qui, entre autres, pour mission de représenter des chasseurs et pêcheurs et de promouvoir des pratiques sécuritaires. Notre filiale éducative de sécurité nature est le mandataire du gouvernement pour donner les formations du cours canadien de sécurité dans le maniement des armes à feu. Chaque année, environ 60 000 participants suivent nos formations. Comme nous enseignons la manipulation sécuritaire des armes à feu depuis 1994, soit la création du cours.
We appear to have a sound problem. Can we just check that and we'll be right back to you?
Can I ask him to suspend a moment, perhaps?
We will suspend for a moment, colleagues. Sorry for the interruption. Mr. Renaud, please restart.
Certainement. Monsieur le Président, membre du Comité sénatorial permanent de la Sécurité nationale, je m'adresse à vous en tant que président de la Fédération québécoise des chasseurs et pêcheurs, un organisme à but non lucratif qui a entre autres pour mission de représenter les chasseurs et pêcheurs et de promouvoir nos pratiques sécuritaires. Notre filiale éducative Sécurité Nature est le mandataire du gouvernement pour donner des formations d'initiation à la chasse et le cours canadien Sécurité dans le maniement des armes à feu. Chaque année, environ 60 000 participants suivent nos formations. Comme nous enseignons la manipulation sécuritaire des armes à feu depuis 1994, soit la création du cours, nous avons toujours misé sur l'éducation et la prévention plutôt que sur le contrôle des armes à feu. Nous mettons nous-mêmes la main à la pâte en allant au-delà de nos obligations de formation. Nous mettons en œuvre des campagnes de sensibilisation à la manipulation sécuritaire des armes. Nous avons mis à la disposition des chasseurs un site web dédié aux méthodes de transport et d'entreposage des armes, en plus d'autres actions ponctuelles comme la distribution de verrous de pontet. Notre proposition globale sur le contrôle des armes est de limiter les contraintes qui s'adressent aux propriétaires légitimes, chasseurs et tireurs sportifs qui ont suivi une formation qui détiennent un permis de possession et d'acquisition. Face aux vagues qu'ont soulevé les amendements au projet de loi C21, apporté en novembre dernier, nous avons soulevé des problèmes principaux. Le premier, c'est que les amendements tels que proposés n'étaient pas suffisamment clairs. La confusion créée par la définition d'armes d'assaut et la liste d'armes prohibées démontre que les mesures de contrôle n'ont pas atteint la bonne cible. Les chasseurs et tireurs sportifs respectueux des lois ont ressenti une grande inquiétude tout à fait justifiée devant ces méthodes de prohibition qui avaient le potentiel d'inclure leurs armes, celles qu'ils utilisent depuis des années pour des activités légales et sécuritaires. Le deuxième problème est le manque de connaissance du public par rapport aux armes à feu, ce qui teinte les décisions politiques prises au sujet des armes. On constate que des critères esthétiques et ergonomiques sont pris en compte pour placer des armes sur la liste d'armes prohibées plutôt que des critères objectifs basés sur la capacité de l'arme. Par ailleurs, les armes semi-automatiques sont vues comme des armes militaires par certains, alors que ce même mécanisme est nécessaire pour certains types de chasse. Rappelons que la capacité du chargeur est déjà réglementée au Canada. De façon générale, la limite est de 5 cartouches, alors qu'en dans les cas spécifiques de la chasse aux oiseaux migrateurs, la limite est de 3. Ce que nous souhaitons, c'est que la réglementation canadienne cible véritablement les criminels plutôt que de criminaliser les propriétaires légitimes d'armes à feu. Il faudrait d'abord créer une définition d'armes d'assaut qui serait basée sur des critères objectifs et non sur le style d'arme. Une telle définition, si acceptée par la majorité de la communauté des chasseurs et des tireurs sportifs, devrait être ensuite appliquée de façon rétroactive à toutes les annexes d'armes prohibées. Il serait enfin possible de cesser de travailler à partir de listes constamment révisées, une façon de faire qui sème inquiétude et confusion. En résumé, nous croyons fermement à l'éducation et à la prévention pour promouvoir des comportements sécuritaires avec les armes à feu. Nos membres veulent eux aussi se sentir en sécurité et souhaitent que les lois qui s'ajoutent pour améliorer la sécurité publique visent les bonnes cibles. Les chasseurs et les tireurs sportifs qui se plient aux exigences de formation et de demande de permis ne sont pas cette cible. Merci.
Merci, Monsieur Renaud. We will now hear from Mr. Gil White.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and honorable senators. Thank you for the opportunity and privilege to address this committee and present the concerns of the organizations I am associated with regards to Bill C-21. My heritage is and continues to be one of hunting, trapping, sport shooting, and angling. The first firearm I owned at 9 years old was a bolt-action .303 British jungle carbine, which I still have, and I'm somewhat concerned of it being confiscated in the future because it's a carbine, a short rifle. As a veteran, I'm most concerned that little by little, the freedoms our veterans have fought for are being legislated away while failing to address the real problem of crime, mental health, poverty, illegal firearms, and gangs. The Saskatchewan Wildlife Federation is a non-profit, non-government charitable organization with over 33,000 members in 123 branches across Saskatchewan, representing every walk of life. Through various educational programs, fisheries enhancement projects, and land acquisitions through the Habitat Trust Fund, the Saskatchewan Wildlife Federation has enhanced fish and wildlife habitat since 1929 and has become a recognized national leader in the conservation field. As a Saskatchewan Wildlife Federation member, past director, and chairman of the recreational firearm community, we are concerned that C-21, if enacted in its current form, will have a detrimental impact not only on shooting sports, but also on wildlife organizations, hunters, and wildlife itself. Wildlife branches within the province of Saskatchewan and across Canada provide a variety of community services, including scout, guide, school, and youth programs, which may include firearm and safety training. My particular branch, the Regina Wildlife Federation, provides ranges and training facilities for the RCMP F Division, RCMP Depot, RCMP ERT teams, CBSA, Police College, Regina Sheriff's Office, CP Rail Police, Ministry of Environment, Legislative Security Unit, Saskatchewan Highway Patrols, Rinks, and Garda World. We are only one of Saskatchewan Wildlife Federations providing such a service, and the loss of our facility would have a detrimental impact on these organizations. With the implementation of C-21, sports shooting club members, who are also represented in the Wildlife Federations, will begin to lose their members, resulting in a loss of membership revenue for the federations, not only through membership fees, but also through fundraising events and donations. In addition, these clubs support our local firearm retailers, who have informed me that since this freeze, they have lost in the neighborhood of 30% of their business and are finding it extremely difficult to acquire replacement parts, thus further negatively impacting them. That, coupled with the inventory they are currently holding due to the May 2020 OIC, has some on the brink of closing their doors. Losing these businesses will have a direct impact on hunting organizations and wildlife due to the fact that they are one of the major sponsors of our fundraising initiatives and are heavily relied on by the hunting community. The sports shooting community hold multiple shooting matches during the course of a year. Financial contribution to individual wildlife clubs and local economies across Canada. C-21 will inevitably and eventually result in the elimination of shooting sports in Canada, thus negatively impacting many clubs and communities across our nation. While we understand and appreciate the need for good, strong firearm regulations and training, we believe that due to the Canadian demographics, a one-size-fits-all may not be the best approach. It's apparent that there are disconnects between federal and provincial governments, specifically Saskatchewan and Alberta, who feel it's necessary to implement their own firearm legislation. The laws we currently have are among the most restrictive in the world. Proper funding and resources are required in order to regularly and effectively enforce them. Additional restrictions, including prohibition, are not required. Since the creation of Bill C-68 in 1995, more and more restrictions on legal law-abiding firearms owners have been introduced, yet violent crime has continued to increase. This should prove that it's not working, and doing more of the same is not the answer. Maybe, just maybe, it's time to try something else. In conclusion, the hunting community that I am associated with is against C-21 and any further restrictions on law-abiding firearms owners. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. White. We now move to our third witness, Mr. Schroff. Please proceed whenever you're ready.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. We feel that many Canadians have little or no knowledge of the realities of rural and northern lifestyles and the importance of firearms. Firearms which are used for hunting, subsistence harvesting, and personal safety in wilderness situations. The implications of Bill C-21 may seem to be of little consequence to many Canadians, and so just become part of the legislative wallpaper. To those of us who live in rural and northern environments, the measures and approach within the bill are destructive to our way of life and may severely impact our abilities to sustain ourselves in our rural and wilderness settings. We wonder how the architects of this bill got so far down the wrong path. Where is there any significant and meaningful commitment to the implementation of a public health approach to dealing with violence in our communities? The Mass Casualty Commission report recommendations are very clear in identifying the need for more mental wellness support, access to assistance and education, and structural changes in the way violence is addressed from a public and personal health perspective. Violence of all kinds, including stabbings, vehicular homicide, use of syringes to threaten and harm, and airplanes, as were used in 9/11, needs to be addressed effectively in our society to truly make Canada a safer place. Where are the commitments to meet these real needs and reduce violence within our society? The firearms control measures within Bill C-21 will not make Canadians safer. They will not prevent or even likely reduce the frequency or severity of tragic acts of violence in Canada today or tomorrow. Please examine the impact of the ban on handguns and other firearms under the order in Council passed 2 years ago, and ask if this has had any effect on reducing violent crime. We present that it has not made a difference, and neither will Bill C-21 have any positive, significant, measurable effect on reducing violent crime or the activities of criminals. All this bill does is stigmatize and punish the law-abiding firearms owners in this country. There's an urgent and compelling need to crack down on criminals and the violence that's perpetrated by organized crime, gangs and gang members, and individual criminals. We need to see the details on how government is cracking down on crime and taking aim at those who use firearms illegally. What are the solutions proposed and the actions that will be taken to reduce crimes involving violence? There are no dangerous guns in our communities. There are individuals and groups of individuals who use firearms dangerously. We need to deal with the underpinnings of violence in all forms. We also need to ensure that firearms licensing, training, and firearms storage requirements are complied with. In many instances, violence is done by those who are not legally licensed or allowed to own a firearm. Ensure that firearms regulations as they now exist are enforced before making any novel substantive changes, such as those presented in Bill C-21. Insist that those working on Bill C-21 take the time to take a firearms course and obtain a possession and acquisition license. It's a rigorous and effective course, and it may change the way people look at the firearms question. We ask you in this committee to send Bill C-21 back as ill-informed, ineffectual, and damaging to the fabric of rural and northern cultures. We ask that you encourage government to commit and deliver sufficient resources to fully implement a public health approach to violence, to dedicate resources and financial support to effectively address crime and gang violence, dedicate resources and financial support to effectively stop the flow of illegal firearms across our borders, and truly listen to the many, many legitimate and law-abiding firearms owners and users in Canada, and walk back this convenient but wrong-headed approach to reducing violence in our communities. We recommend inclusive, comprehensive consultation with Canadians across this diverse and varied land on how to reduce all types of violence and unlawful behaviors. If time allows, later on in this discussion, I'd like to talk about a conversation I had with an on-duty police officer yesterday and input from a psychologist who works privately for a correctional institution. I will close by noting that I appreciate the time taken by this committee to seek input and study Bill C-21. Thank you for the opportunity to bring this perspective to you today.
Thank you, Mr. Schroff and Mr. Renaud and Mr. White. We will now proceed to questions. Before proceeding, just a health and safety tip. I'd like to ask participants in the room to please refrain from leaning in too closely to the microphone or to remove your earpiece when doing so. This will avoid any harmful sound feedback that could negatively impact committee staff in the room. Our guests are here with us today until 10 a.m. We're going to do our best to allow time for each member to ask a question. With this in mind, 4 minutes is allotted to each question, including the answer, and I will hold up this card to indicate that 30 seconds remain in your time. I ask that you keep your questions succinct and to identify the witness that you are addressing. I now offer the first question to our Deputy Chair, Senator Dagenet.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Alors, ma première question va être pour Messieurs Renaud et White. L'interdiction des armes d'assaut est un élément important du projet de loi C21, mais c'est aussi difficile à comprendre parce que la définition de ces armes m'apparaît ambiguë. D'abord, j'aimerais savoir de vous deux à quoi servent ces armes, qui sont ceux qui les achètent et pourquoi en posséder.
On parle. Est-ce que je commence, oui?
Allez-y, M. Renaud.
Donc, votre question, vous voulez savoir à quoi servent nos armes à feu qu'on utilise, qui sont considérées comme des armes à feu, des armes d'assaut. Ce qu'on voit, c'est qu'il s'agit, ils ont été classés armes d'assaut par question d'ergonomie, non de façon objective. Nos armes à feu, si on prend les semi-automatiques, qui sont utilisées à la chasse aux oiseaux migrateurs, beaucoup, ces points de vue, efficacité de tenue de tir, sans toujours recharger une balle à la fois, parce qu'on a quelques secondes pour, quand on est à la chasse aux oiseaux migrateurs, pour pouvoir atteindre notre cible de façon efficace et mortelle. Donc, et c'est réglementé à 3 cartouches en partant. Fait qu'on a 3 coups consécutifs, rapides, pour pouvoir bien faire notre tir de façon propre et d'atteindre notre cible. Et l'autre côté, on considère aussi des armes d'assaut, nos armes de chasse, parce qu'on dit qu'ils sont plutôt conçus ou qu'ils sont conçus avec des possibilités de grands chargeurs. Tandis que si ce serait plutôt fabriqué avec la possibilité de chargeur légal au Canada, donc moins de 5 cartouches, ce ne serait pas des armes considérées d'assaut. Et quand on regarde la liste, en plus, dans le G46, une liste interminable où de fois en fois, on pourrait associer et mettre des armes de façon non objective. Donc, notre crainte pour nous, c'est des armes d'assaut. On n'utilise pas des armes d'assaut, on utilise des armes de chasse.
Et M. White? For the same question, Mr. White?
No, thank you for your question, Senator. First of all, assault style. Style is something my wife wears. You know, she might be stylish one day and not the next. A style is nothing more than an appearance. We need to focus on the action of the firearms. That being said, there are reasons to have semi-automatic firearms. And in my opinion, a semi-automatic firearm is not an assault firearm. An assault firearm is a full automatic firearm, is a rocket launcher, which are have been prohibited in Canada for decades. A semi-automatic rifle, I use some in my trap line. I mean, I could be attacked by wolves. I could be attacked by bears when I'm out there. You know, and if you ever watched the hunting of a wild boar, you would definitely understand why somebody would want a semi-automatic rifle. They charge you and they will kill you, no doubt.
Second round. I have a time for another question.
I think we'll put you on for second round. Thank you.
Second
We now go to Senator Coucher, to be followed by Senators Boisvenu, Plett, Deakin, Ontario, and Dasco. Senator Coucher.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the witnesses for your testimony and for raising some very important issues related to this bill. I want to acknowledge that I received some correspondence with very thoughtful critiques of Bill C21, and you have echoed some of those concerns. My question is for Mr. Renaud. We know that about 80+% of all firearm-related deaths in Canada are from suicide, intimate partner family violence, and accidents. These guns are very unlikely to be smuggled guns, and these issues aren't carried out by criminals. Of the remainder deaths, gangs and criminals are the major causes of deaths, and smuggled guns account for about half to two-thirds of those deaths, so about 5 to 10% of the total number of gun deaths in Canada. I agree that these deaths are tragic, and Canada must do much, much better at dealing with gun smuggling and gang-related violence. Yet many organizations focus only on that 5 to 10% of deaths and argue since Bill C21 does not focus on gangs and criminals and smuggled guns, it misses the marks. Yet the vast majority of gun deaths in Canada are not from smuggled guns used by gangs and criminals. Should reputable organizations such as yours that focus on responsible gun ownership help address this kind of disinformation about gun deaths in Canada, and if so, how would you do it?
Who's the question going to?
Mr. Renaud.
Mr. Renaud. Did you hear the question, Mr. Renaud?
Oui, OK, je n'avais pas entendu qu'elle s'adressait à moi particulièrement. Si je comprends bien, c'est comment qu'on fait pour se débarrasser des gangs, mais c'est justement, c'est au lieu d'investir des sommes d'argent dans un projet de loi qui... on ne m'entend pas?
Can you quickly clarify?
Okay, could I clarify? Thank you so much. I was pointing out that according to all the data that we have, over 80% of all firearm-related deaths are not from gangs or criminal behavior. They're from suicide, intimate partner family violence, and accidents. Yet we keep hearing over and over that we have to focus only on gangs and smuggled guns and criminals. But the vast majority of gun deaths are not from that group. So I'm asking you, as a leader of a reputable organization focusing on responsible gun ownership, how can you and your organization help address this kind of disinformation so that people better understand where most firearm-related deaths are actually coming from?
Il y a des organismes qui se spécialisent au niveau de la santé mentale et ce n'est pas en faisant un projet de loi tel que le C21, en criminalisant les chasseurs et les tireurs sportifs qu'on atteindrait cette cible. Il y a des gens qui ont des besoins en santé mentale et on recommande fortement d'investir des sommes d'argent à ces niveaux-là pour aider les organismes qui vont dans ce sens-là, pour aider à déceler, que ce soit au niveau des réseaux de la santé. Mais ce n'est pas en prenant les chasseurs et les tireurs sportifs coincés dans un projet de loi qu'on va atteindre cette cible qui est très importante selon nous, la cible d'aider les gens qui sont en détresse psychologique, en détresse... quand c'est un suicide... c'est pas juste une arme de chasse qui peut aider au suicide, qui peut faire le suicide. Il y a beaucoup plus que ça. Donc, l'atteinte de l'objectif, c'est d'aider ces gens-là. d'une façon où il y a à leur obtenir de l'aide psychologique. Et il y a des organismes qui sont très bien doués pour faire ce travail-là et il faut les soutenir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Renaud. And I will note that I added some time given the need for clarity. So thank you for the response. We now go to Senator Boisvenu.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. J'aurais deux questions. La première, j'aimerais que D'abord, je remercie les témoins d'être ici. Ma première question, j'aimerais que vous me répondiez par oui ou non. Le ministre a déclaré lorsqu'il est venu au comité ici, et je le cite, « Nous avons discuté avec des organisations des Premières Nations, des peuples inuits, métis, des communautés rurales et nordiques, des groupes de victimes, les communautés des armes à feu, les sportifs, les tireurs sportifs de tout le Canada pour connaître leur point de vue et nous assurer que nous respectons leurs traditions et leur mode de vie. Ces consultations nous ont permis d'aller de l'avant. » Alors, aux trois témoins, est-ce que vous avez été consultés sur ce projet de loi-là?
Pour la Fédération québécoise chasseurs-pêcheurs, on a eu la visite de l'équipe du ministre Mancino, oui.
Et est-ce que vous... D'accord, merci. Mr. Schroff?
Yes, we received a visit after the amendments were made in November of last year, but we did not receive a visit after those amendments were dropped and changes were made to the bill.
Mr. White?
The Saskatchewan Wildlife Federation was not consulted.
Et ma deuxième question, vos recommandations que vous avez faites, est-ce qu'ils ont été pris en compte? Monsieur Renaud.
On est venu nous expliquer certains amendements. On a soulevé des questions et on a eu réponse par la suite. Est-ce qu'on a tenu compte à nos recommandations? Je vous dirais que non, parce que les amendements apportés n'ont pas été modifiés.
Mr. Schroff?
I agree with the previous testimony.
Mr. White?
Like I said, we weren't consulted, so I have no comment.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Senator Boisvenu. We now go to Senator Platt.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses here. My question as well is to each of the witnesses, and please be as succinct as you were with Senator Boisvenu, and then maybe I can get my next one in. But to any of the witnesses, when the minister appeared before a committee, he also said the following, and I quote, "I don't think hunters or sports groups oppose this legislation." My questions for the witnesses, do you know of any hunting or sport groups in Canada that support the legislation? Further to that, is there a disconnect between your organization and your members? And is there any evidence that most hunters or sports shooters support any part of C21? Mr. Schroff, why don't you start, and then we'll ask the other two witnesses.
I do not know of any sporting organizations that support this legislation. No, I do not believe we're disconnected from our membership. We have about 1,500 members. We also reach, through our communications and our education outreach, many of our Yukon folks that are outside of our membership. And I'm sorry, you'll have to refresh me on the third question, sir.
Well, I think you answered it, whether there are any hunters or sports shooters that support the legislation, in your opinion.
Not that I'm aware of, sir.
Thank you. To the other two witnesses, please.
Pour nous ici au Québec, notre fédération, on ne connaît aucun organisme qui soutient ce projet de loi qui est contraignant, que ce soit nos tireurs sportifs, nos clubs de tir, nos membres, nos chasseurs. Non, même beaucoup de pression pour continuer à défendre, à être contre le projet de loi tel qu'il est là.
Mr. White?
From my perspective, we don't know of any hunters or organizations that are in support of C21. Definitely, we are not disconnected from our 33,000 members. We are regularly in communications with them in multiple ways.
Sounds to me like we're pretty much all on the same page there. A further question, the minister further said, the premise that this affects law-abiding gun owners who pursue sports activities, such as hunting or sports shooting, is a phrase that is often used. We have been explicit and careful to ensure that these measures do not target those people. Farmers or people in rural communities, sportspersons, people using firearms in northern and indigenous communities. They are not targeted or affected or included in these measures that they're trying to have adopted. Would you agree that sportspersons and firearm clubs are not impacted by this bill, Mr. Schroff, first?
We absolutely do not agree with that statement, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Menard.
Non, on n'est pas d'accord du tout. Les tireurs sportifs sont très impactés par cette réglementation. Et on a besoin des tireurs sportifs, des clubs de tir, si on veut absolument avoir des utilisateurs d'armes à feu, des chasseurs qui font la pratique de façon sécuritaire et ils doivent se pratiquer, ça prend des champs de tir. Donc, non, on n'est pas d'accord.
Very quickly, Mr. White.
No, we don't agree at all. It, in fact, only targets law-abiding firearms owners. It doesn't target criminals whatsoever.
Well, Senator Kuchar is, and I'll be very brief, Chair, Senator Kuchar is citing disinformation here quite often. I would suggest the height of disinformation here is what the minister has been telling us. But thank you, thank you, witnesses.
Excuse me, Chair. I don't know how common it is in the Senate, having not been here as long as Mr. Platt, to call out your senators for erroneously calling out your colleagues. Mr. Platt, I think that is below what we would do as honorable colleagues. It was very clear, and I'll restate that 80% or more of all firearm deaths are not from smuggled guns or criminals. That is what I said. And Senator Platt, I wish you would either apologize for your comments or at least acknowledge that that was not disinformation.
Well, first of all, I will apologize only if I have hurt your feelings, but I was not referring necessarily to today. The other day, you very clearly, Senator, talked about disinformation, and I think if we check Hansard, check the records that will be there. I did not imply that you were wrong. I simply implied that you had referred to disinformation. That's all I did. And so let the record show I did not accuse you, sir, of anything. But if you took that wrong, for that I do apologize.
Well, thank you very much for that apology, Senator Platt.
Senator Kuchar, we have to get back to our witnesses. I don't want to take any more witness time. Senator Deakin, Ontario.
Thank you. And thank you for the three of you for being here. I'm going to direct this question initially to Mr. White, but offer of time for others to respond. Mr. White, you're quoted like many others saying this legislation targets legal gun owners. And at the outset of these hearings and after reading 1,100 letters and responding to many very, very good letters, this argument is shifting a little bit for me. I'm thinking about some of the comments you made this morning, that were made this morning by several, of why some of the banned weapons are needed by hunters. And you had some very specific examples this morning with boar and eagle. I'm also trying to balance that ergonomic benefit of those guns on the same guns that can kill a good number of people in a short amount of time. So laws become trade-offs of risk and harms, and many would argue that the risk these weapons pose to people may outweigh the benefit and I'm not disputing or disrespecting the importance of hunting, but may outweigh the benefit of that particular gun. And I'm just wondering where you think that proper balance needs to be. First, Mr. White.
Well, first of all, they're not a weapon until they're used as a weapon. Until then, they're a firearm. And we all seem to focus on the firearm in any crisis. We never seem to focus on the person behind the firearm or what's brought them to that point in their life. I would definitely like to see that focus changed. I also own a couple of handguns that I purchased when I worked for Garda World. And I purchased them because I wanted to get proficient at using them because Garter World as a company only allowed me to go to the range once a year. And here I am walking around in high schools, in behind airport security, in banks, wherever, all over in public areas carrying this firearm. I wanted to be proficient at it. So I bought a couple so I could go to the range and practice on my own time. Those firearms right now are worthless because they're in my safe. I can still use them, yeah, but they're in my safe, and eventually will probably be destroyed unless there's some financial gain when I pass away due to the recent Saskatchewan firearm legislation. But until that happens, I really don't know.
I'm just wondering at this moment if I could ask the other two guests to comment on that balance.
Yes. Of course, all legislation is a balancing act in some way or form, and it's a challenge. I think the biggest thing for us is that we need to look at Canada as a whole when we're talking about legislation and the effects upon people within Canada, and ask ourselves, if we apply this uniformly, one size fits everyone across Canada, is that the right choice? Is that going to achieve the objectives that we set out and our responsibilities to society? And I would say in this particular instance, I don't think C21 is a balance. I really believe that we have to get to the root cause of some of these issues, as was mentioned by one of my colleagues here this morning. And what's behind the violence? What's behind the decision to take the tool, the firearm in this instance, and do something that's illegal with it? Because most of the acts that have been cited here this morning, or that we've seen, the tragedies that have occurred in our society, are illegal acts. Whether they're done with a legal firearm or not, they're illegal acts. And in many cases, and I will take exception to some of the statistics that have been cited, in many instances, they're illegal firearms. Now, an illegal firearm doesn't mean that it has to be imported illegally. It can be obtained illegally. It can be used for the purpose that it was not intended. Handguns have been on the restricted list for decades and decades in Canada, and yet they still appear when crimes of violence occur. So I would say there needs to be a balance. I don't think C21 is a balance. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We're over time, I'm afraid. So we go next to Senator Dasco, to be followed by Senator Cardoza.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. My question is, I guess, directed at Mr. Schroff and also the others. I would like to dig a little deeper into the question of what C21 says about hunting. Now, when I read C21, I don't see any measure in C21 that affects hunters. So can you point to something in C21 that limits hunters, specifically? We know it's illegal to use handguns in hunting. Are you here to support handgun owners? I want to hear about the hunters. And exactly, if you could point to me, any of the witnesses, to where it is that hunting is affected in this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator, for the question. I cannot cite chapter and verse or page and paragraph number of Bill C21. I apologize for that. What I can say is that the measures included in Bill C21 will place some firearms that are used by the hunting community onto a prohibited or restricted list. So that is a direct effect on the opportunity and ability of hunters to conduct that activity. Also, I will say from our northern perspective, we have many trappers in our communities, and we have many people that are subsistence hunters in our communities. And those groups as well will be adversely affected by the implementation of Bill C21 as it exists today.
Is that they're hunters? it's illegal to use handguns. What is it, how is it that they're impacted?
Some of the
don't quite
firearms
understand.
that are listed, that are encompassed within the bill are currently being used for hunting, and those firearms will no longer be allowed to be used for hunting. So that is a direct effect. And there's also a number of people in northern and rural Canada use some of the firearms that are currently captured in the definition, or the definition in Bill C21 of assault-style weapons. Those are actually and actively being used for hunting with appropriate-sized magazines that are legal in Canada today.
May I ask this question of the other witnesses? Can you point to anything in C21 that limits hunters, please? Okay, thank you.
Si vous me permettez, Madame Marc Renaud, on regarde la définition proposée en G4. Ça concerne les semi-automatiques. À la chasse, on n'utilise pas des automatiques, on utilise des semi-automatiques et qui sont conçus pour accepter des chargeurs. Beaucoup d'armes à feu par les fabricants sont conçues pour d'autres endroits, d'autres pays dans le monde où ils peuvent utiliser des chargeurs à plus grande capacité. Ici, au Canada, c'est un maximum de 5. Déjà là, si on voudrait rendre ça plus accessible, il faudrait que ça soit inscrit qu'il est fabriqué avec un chargeur légal utilisé au Canada.
Excuse me, sir.
Donc, yes.
No, no existing guns are affected by C21.
Oui.
Oui,
il y a des armes à feu. La liste est très fastidieuse. Je ne passerai pas au travers de la liste, mais la liste est très fastidieuse et il y a des armes à feu à travers le Canada que les chasseurs utilisent, révisées par C21 parce qu'elles pourraient accueillir des chargeurs de plus grande capacité. Mais ce n'est pas le cas. Au Canada, on ne peut pas utiliser des chargeurs à plus de 5 cartouches. Donc oui, et à l'intérieur, il y a des armes et lesquelles la liste est tellement longue.
Thanks very much. So we are going next to Senator Cardoza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. This is certainly a fascinating bill because we, as legislators, we get to hear a lot of very differing views on a bill that's very important to people. I want to pursue the discussion that Senator Deakin started a few minutes ago in terms of balance. I think sometimes this debate is portrayed as urban versus rural, or Saskatchewan versus downtown Toronto, or things like that. And we heard from women's groups in the last few days that issues of domestic violence take place across the country in rural settings as much as they do in urban settings. So, gentlemen, I wonder if you have any concerns about the issues that we heard from women's groups in the last few days about the violence that women face in homes where there may be guns. And maybe I'll start with Mr. Schroff, since you're here.
Thank you, Senator. And I'll start out with saying I deplore any intimate partner violence, and the thought of it is not something I even like to contemplate. However, I will say that I agree with you. That occurs across Canada, north to south and east to west, and it's truly unfortunate. Our premise is based on let's talk about violence. Let's talk about what the root cause of violence is. Let's talk about the need for mental wellness support, the need for family counseling support, the need for follow-up when issues have been identified. We're not seeing investments in those areas, and we're not seeing attention being directed to them. It's directed at the tools. When really we need to have places where people can go to get help. We need to have that help follow through when there's issues identified, and we need to, if necessary, and the legislation exists today, if there's a real or perceived threat to someone, to an individual or a group of individuals, firearms can be confiscated. So we need to see, to take firearms out of the home where potentially a domestic dispute may occur. And we need to follow up, and we need to do those things. And it's a real challenge to take that sort of approach and look at it and say, have we done the right thing? Have we helped minimize domestic violence, and have we helped reduce the effects of that violence? It's a lot easier to take aim at firearms and say, we're going to take firearms off the street and out of the gun cabinets. And look, we've got 150,000 firearms that we have confiscated or bought back, or whatever the term is. That's a good scorecard, but it's not necessarily going to make one person safer. But if we can get proper counseling and support and access to the resources needed to reduce violence, we can make a real difference.
What are your thoughts about the red flag provisions in the bill?
I'm sorry.
What are your thoughts about the red flag provisions in the bill in terms of removing guns from a home where there is the potential of domestic violence?
Again, if we can reduce violence and approach that and look at the root causes, I think it's a good one. If we have the mental wellness support and family support that says, look, there may be a problem here, and one of the things we do is need to remove the firearms from the equation, I think that could be appropriate. But those provisions already exist. And they exist in the licensing requirement when you get a possession and acquisition license. When you apply, there's an opportunity for your spouse to make a comment about whether he or she feels that it's appropriate for the individual to own firearms or to have a license. So the opportunities exist already to do that. We just don't have those mental wellness supports to the level that we need to have them.
Yeah, I'm certainly they're hard in the rural areas to have those supports.
Thank you, Senator Cardozo, and thank you to our witness. We now move to the second round. I have Senators Dagenet, Boisvenu, and Platt on the list. Senator Dagenet.
Alors, merci, Monsieur le Président. Ma question va être pour Monsieur Schroff. Monsieur Schroff, C21 préserve les droits des peuples autochtones sur la possession des armes. Estimez-vous qu'au Yukon et dans les territoires, C21 va créer 2 classes de chasseurs? Et si oui, quel sera l'impact?
Thank you very much for your question. I was just waiting for the translation, sir. I believe it sets up a dichotomy that doesn't need to exist. There are differences already between the hunting that's associated with Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, mainly based, and I'm speaking from Yukon, around sustenance hunting, which is allowed year-round for First Nations or Indigenous people, whereas the non-Indigenous licensed hunters have specific hunting seasons. But to make a differentiation based on access to a class or a type of firearm is unnecessary, and I don't believe it will help move the safety of the public and Canadians forward in one bit.
Merci, M. Schroff. Merci, M. le Président.
Thank you. We now go to Senator Boisvenu.
Merci beaucoup, M. le Président. Alors, ma question va être pour M. Renaud, pour que vous terminiez votre explication de tantôt. Ce que je comprends bien quand vous parlez des fameuses armes qui vont être maintenant prohibées parce qu'elles peuvent être chargées de magazines plus que 5 balles. Si je comprends bien votre raisonnement, vous dites que ces chargeurs-là sont déjà réglementés au Canada. Vous ne pouvez pas avoir plus que 5 cartouches ou 5 balles. Mais comme l'arme est fabriquée aux États-Unis et qu'elles peuvent supporter des chargeurs de plus de 5 balles, on a décidé de les interdire dans le C21. C'est bien ce que je comprends?
Exactement. Et vous l'avez bien dit, la loi canadienne est claire. C'est des chargeurs pas plus 5 cartouches. Fait que on dit conçu, ça devrait plutôt être fabriqué. Parce qu'il y a certains endroits dans le monde qui ont le droit, mais nous, au Canada, c'est déjà réglementé. Les chasseurs, les tireurs sportifs sont très au fait depuis longtemps et on mise beaucoup plus d'ailleurs sur l'éducation, la sensibilisation à bien utiliser les armes à feu.
Monsieur Renaud, si l'arme était fabriquée au Canada et qu'elle ne pouvait pas supporter de chargeur de plus de 5 balles, elle serait légale?
Bien, du moment que l'arme, avec le projet de loi conçu présentement, qu'elle soit fabriquée partout, si elle est conçue pour pas plus de 5 balles, elle serait reconnue légale. Par contre, il y a un chargeur. Donc, qu'elle soit fabriquée pour une possibilité de 5 balles ou plus, au Canada, on ne peut pas avoir plus que 5 cartouches à l'intérieur de notre chargeur.
Merci.
Ça fait plaisir.
Senator Platt goes next.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start with Mr. White and then maybe Mr. Schroff if there's time. Many witnesses have appeared before a committee this past week have been supportive of a ban on assault weapons. But it is the definition of that that is in large part the problem. In Canada, as you know, we have many semi-automatic rifles that are used for hunting. It's already Mr. White suggested when he hunts wild boar, for example. Certainly well over 1 million semi-automatic rifles in legal hands, and they are non-restricted firearms. How does one pick and choose some of these guns and classify them as assault weapons, but leave in circulation likely non-restricted semi-automatic firearms that may shoot exactly the same ammunition and claim that some of these guns are safer than others? I would like your thoughts on how doing that makes Canadians any safer. Mr. White briefly, and then Mr. Schroff.
I don't believe it actually makes Canadians any safer because, again, we're focusing on the firearm and not the person behind it. You know, there are several semi-automatic rifles and of different calibers, and you know, I might have a semi-automatic 22 or semi-automatic SKS, let's say. You know, and depending on what I'm hunting will depend on the rifle I choose to go and hunt that. You know, hunting itself, I think, is being affected by C21 because of the restrictions put on sport shooters. When we lose these sport shooters, and we will if this continues to go forward, it's going to affect hunters because it's going to affect retailers and wildlife organizations because of the decrease in memberships and participation. So how you can classify that, again, by focusing on the firearm instead of the person, I'm not sure how you would do that.
Mr. Schroff.
I agree. I'm not sure how you'd do that, sir. One of the interesting challenges, I have a semi-automatic centerfire rifle that belonged to my grandfather that would not be captured by the current regulation because it does not have a separate clip. That firearm went to my father, went to my sister, and I ended up with it. And it's a perfectly valid hunting firearm. It's ideally suited for things like the wild boar or charging bison or a grizzly bear that's intent on doing you grievous bodily harm. I think one of the challenges that we have here as a society is the idea that there are assault-style rifles, which in many people's view, I think, are black rifles. The rifles that come out that don't have wood stocks, that are shorter barrel lengths, still within the legal barrel lengths for non-restricted firearms in Canada. And some of those have shown up as weapons that were used in crimes or in inflicting bodily harm on people. I think we really need to have a look at it and say which weapons or which firearms are suitable for hunting, and most or all of them are. And quit focusing on the tool or the firearm and look at what the intent people have and why they're using firearms of any sort and description to do bad things. And a firearm that was on the initial list is not a semi-automatic firearm, but a single-shot firearm, a Ruger No. 1 single-shot in .460 Weatherby Magnum. Thank you. That is on anybody's restricted list, I have no idea. I have a Ruger single shot that I use for hunting. I know how long it takes to discharge a cartridge, cycle, and put another one in. And even at .460 Weatherby Magnum, it is not a weapon that people would be using for nefarious purposes.
Thank you, Mr. Schroff. Thank you very much. We have Senators Deakin and Cardozo left. We have a very short space of time, so 3 minutes each for questions and answers. Thank you, Senator Deakin, over to you.
Thank you. And a little bit of a follow-up from my colleague. We continue to hear from witnesses who state that the bill does not change the status of a single long gun in Canada. The only long guns that would be affected by this legislation would those be designed and manufactured after a bill like this comes into force. It doesn't perhaps affect hunters as badly as some may think because of this long gun piece. But at the same time, we're hearing that about 60% of gun owners in this country would actually support action to ban assault weapons. And we've gone around this a couple different ways today, but I would just like to hear your response, Mr. Schroff, first on this, followed by our other guests, if you don't mind.
Thank you for that. I don't know. I have not seen the statistics of 60% of gun owners supporting this legislation. I believe that it will. I still maintain that it will have an effect on hunters, the firearms owning community, firearms using community, retailers, and small communities, because the revenue generated by the small retailers in towns like Whitehorse, which we're a whole territory, but it's 44,000 people. The money that flows through the sporting goods stores are important to our local economy. The opportunity for people to go hunting, people come from all over the world and hire guides and outfitters to take them hunting. It's a significant contributor to our economy. So I think we need to look at the implications of this bill in that full range, in that context of rural and northern Canada and the economic impacts as well. And I go back to asking, what are we trying to achieve here? We're trying to achieve a reduction in violence. In this particular instance, violence that uses firearms. But there's all kinds of violence out there, and we need to address all of those. And if we do, we'll capture the portion of violence where people use firearms. And I really think we need to spend our money and point our efforts that way. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. We now go to Senator Cardoza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to come back to the issue of balance again, and in terms of reducing violence. So we've heard from organizations that assist women who faced domestic violence, and their prescription is to reduce some of these guns, especially semi-automatic and assault-style weapons. So that's, as a committee, we have to balance those views against the views you put forward. Let me ask you, and perhaps Mr. White or Monsieur Renaud, whether you think there is a case for banning any types of semi-automatic or assault-style weapons, or whether that should not be done at all.
Mr. Renaud.
Oui, pouvez-vous répéter plus clairement votre question?
Is there a case for banning any types of semi-automatic or assault-style weapons?
Non, aucunement. Et pour la violence conjugale que vous parlez, c'est des gens qui sont dans le besoin de soutien autre. Les armes à feu semi-automatiques ne régleront en rien, parce que la violence, quand elle est faite, comme disait tantôt un de mes collègues, c'est en arrière de l'arme et non l'arme qui est la problématique. Donc, un soutien psychologique à ces gens-là, de l'aide, et réglerait beaucoup plus le problème. Les armes semi-automatiques, par le projet de loi, ne régleront rien.
Okay, merci.
Mr. White?
No, I don't think there is. And I'll go back to my opening statement where I believe that we need to regularly and effectively enforce the current rules and regulations that we already have. When it comes to domestic violence, there are already red flag laws, if you want to call them that. That exists today. A lot of it exists in our current legislation, but we're not enforcing it. Let's do that at the very least.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, this brings us to the end of the panel. Yes, Senator.
Point of order, please, if I could. I would like to set the record straight on something that happened earlier in this committee, and it'll only take a minute. I don't know whether Senator Kuchar misunderstood the comment that I made or not. I feel that he thought I was accusing him of possibly spreading disinformation. That is certainly not what I said, and certainly it was not the intent. I was referring to his preoccupation in a couple of other committee meetings where he referred to disinformation that was being spread in his question. He wasn't accusing anybody, but he was asking a question about disinformation on October 30th, 7 times in his question, and on November 1st, twice in his question. And so my question was dealing with Senator Kucher's preoccupation in that and not in anything he said here today. So I hope Senator Kucher understands that and accepts that as an explanation. It was not an accusation on my part, but rather just simply referring to questions he had asked.
Senator Kucher.
Could I thank Senator Platt for that clarification? I appreciate that very much. And Senator Platt, I think both of us would completely agree with each other that disinformation, whoever spreads it and wherever it comes from, is not helpful to any of us. So thank you, Senator Platt.
Thank you to you both. Colleagues, we'll now suspend briefly to prepare for our next panel. We will now continue with our next panel. For those tuning into today's meeting, it explores Bill C21, an act to amend certain acts and to make consequential amendments, all relating to the regulation of firearms. For this next hour, we have the pleasure of welcoming, on behalf of the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights, Rod Giltaca, Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director. On behalf of the Canadian Sporting Arms and Ammunition Association, Wes Winkel, President, and on behalf of the National Firearms Association, Rick Igercich, President. Thank you for joining us today. We now invite you to provide your opening remarks, to be followed by questions from our members. I remind you that we have 5 minutes each for your testimony, and we begin today with Mr. Rod Giltaca. Mr. Giltaca, please proceed whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning, Senators. I just want to add for the record that I spent 10 years as an instructor for the RCMP Canadian Firearms Program, so that's the licensing system here in Canada. So in preparation for my appearance this morning, I circulated an 18-minute video outlining the reasons for our opposition to specifically the handgun ban in Bill C21. It's my understanding that some of you did take that 18 minutes to hear our position and the 100,000 licensed gun owners that I'm speaking directly on behalf of today. So last week, I heard an official from Public Safety reveal that the government carried out some kind of formal analysis that the handgun ban would effectively end private firearm ownership of handguns in Canada in around 50 years. And I guess they figured that at that point, people like me will have all died off. Our property will have been seized with no compensation. And that would be the end of people like me. And that is a targeted destruction of an entire culture involving 650,000 Canadians, including 450,000 that are actively involved in sport shooting. Now, some might wonder, how do you justify something like that? And so we heard the justification from Minister LeBlanc last week, I believe, and it was, to be honest with you, the usual rhetoric that we heard from Marco Mendicino and Bill Blair before him. And we also heard from the RCMP, and they offered gang-related firearm violence is increasing, and they chose to trace some number of guns, and some portion of those were legally imported into Canada. And of course, we heard about misinformation, a recurring theme. So I'd like to introduce some indisputable, self-evident truth to the conversation. The handgun ban in Bill C21 will eliminate 100% of the legally held handguns in Canada, and some number of crime guns. We don't know what that number is exactly. But in the case of the Toronto Police Service, Inspector Norm Proctor of their Guns and Gangs unit said that 97% of the firearms that they took from crimes, actual crime guns, and that's important, actual crime guns, came from the United States, 97%. So what you're telling me is the proverbial you, is that to address that 3%, at least in this case, to be fair, that we're okay with the loss of, 700 clubs out of the 1,400 that exist across the country, maybe more. Billions in real estate acquired, maintained, and developed by Canadians, millions of Canadians over generations. And they're using their after-tax money, I might add. So do we know what the value of that is, even just the monetary value? Was that in the RCMP's 50-year assessment? And do we know the value of the handguns that they're looking to seize for free, apparently? We do know that the Conference Board of Canada tells us that destroying sport shooting in Canada will cost the economy somewhere around $2 billion annually. So, and I think a really important question is, are we all okay with the generational anger that will result in a Canada that has never been more divided than it is right now? The government's just walking in and extinguishing an entire culture that was created over generations. But maybe these things are worth it. I'm willing to have that conversation, certainly today. But for that to be true, this is important. Have the RCMP, the Firearms Program, the Liberals, the NDP, the Bloc, have any of these people shown us any evidence that criminals won't be able to replace that 3% of handguns that they're apparently getting from the legal market? Might criminals just increase their smuggling operations? They have plenty of money. Are they just going to fly more handguns across the border on drones? They've been doing that lately. Will they ramp up their manufacturing operations? That is literally easy for them to do. What assurances has the government or the RCMP given us that these criminals cannot make up that 3% any other way? So I would, on the contrary, I'd suggest that this is not a reasonable approach to addressing firearm-related violence, certainly with handguns. Anyway, to close, the government has a real evidence problem here. It has a real credibility problem here. This is an embattled bill. It's been dragging along for 2 years. So I would urge you to think very carefully about this in the study of your bill, and I know that many Canadians would really appreciate that. So thank you for your time. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Giltaca. Next is Mr. Wes Winkel. Mr. Winkel, please proceed when you are ready.
Thank you. I am Wes Winkel, President of the Canadian Sporting Arms and Ammunition Association and the owner of Elwood Epps Sporting Goods. Today I come before you addressing the pressing concerns of our association and industry regarding Bill C-21. The CSSA represents over 4,500 businesses in Canada that operate within the hunting and firearm sector. Our industry plays a pivotal role in the Canadian economy. We contribute over $8 billion annually to our nation's GDP, whilst providing employment for over 45,000 individuals in Canada. However, we are currently weighed down by a regulatory environment that has become a substantial burden and a source of anxiety for our industry. One of the most disconcerting aspects of Bill C-21 is the prohibition on handgun transfers. Handgun sales account for more than 30% of our revenue for many businesses, and for some this percentage is much higher. As a result of this ban on transferring handguns, our businesses are suffering financial losses and or closures. Executors and families are being forced to destroy heirloom collections, some of which have been significant historical, financial, and sentimental value. These measures not only harm our industry, but also create a situation where cherished collections become valueless. Furthermore, the prohibition of semi-automatic firearms, designated after the enactment of Bill C-21, and the initiative that will have random selection of existing firearms targeted for prohibition have caused great concern amongst our members. These actions will result in yet another substantial financial loss with no solid evidence that it will increase public safety. Such provisions generate considerable unease for manufacturers who invest in creating new models of modern sporting and hunting rifles to meet the market demand. Dealers must place orders at least 6 months in advance without any clarity on when these regulations will come into force or how they will be enacted. Businesses must also invest in these sales with marketing, staff training, displays, signage, all throughout their facilities. It is crucial to recognize that firearms in Canada are already subject to stringent regulations, and our business members diligently work to ensure compliance with existing laws and regulations, guaranteeing that only licensed Canadians obtain legal firearms. Air guns are also impacted by these regulations. Our government must acknowledge that there are over 8 million air guns in circulation in Canada. Taking such a broad, general approach to regulating air guns significantly impacts recreational shooting and shooting sports, directly and immediately threatening the existence of many businesses and jobs. Bill C-21, as it stands, is a deeply flawed piece of legislation that necessitates either total abandonment or significant amendments. Failure to do so could jeopardize an entire industry that Canada cannot afford to lose. Our industry makes a significant contribution to the Canadian economy, conservation efforts, and employment. We understand that rigorous regulations are already in place for firearms in Canada, and we are cognizant of the fact that our customers statistically do not contribute to the violence witnessed on our streets. The provisions in Bill C-21 are touted as measures to enhance public safety, but we view them as a significant misallocation of resources and a threat to our already delicate economy. We address the concerns of our industry. We urgently need to an avenue to reopen for legal handgun transfers, and we must reconsider such a broad approach to future prohibitions on modern sporting and hunting rifles or semi-automatic firearms. Attention must be bolstered on policing efforts, rectifying the laws in our catch and release bail system, and fortifying our border services. In closing, I encourage the Senate to carefully consider the impact of Bill C-21 on our industry and work towards a more balanced approach for firearms regulations that prioritize public safety without crippling business and eradicating jobs. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will be available to answer any questions or concerns you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Winkel. Finally, we go to Mr. Rick Igercich, and Mr. Igercich, please proceed when you're ready.
Honourable Chair, Senators, good morning. My name is Rick Igercich. I am the President of Canada's National Firearms Association. I am here today representing the members of my organization and other law-abiding Canadians. I want to speak specifically about two parts of this bill: the handgun freeze that will eventually lead to confiscation of personal property. I would also like to comment on the government's creation of the Firearms Advisory Committee. I am neither an academic, nor a bureaucrat, nor a lawyer. I am simply one of the many Canadians that Bill C-21 will directly affect. As a third-generation firearms owner, I have several family heirlooms, including handguns that have been passed from my grandfather to my father and finally to me. My grandfather, a First World War veteran, was a farmer who legally carried a handgun in his daily activities on the farm, whether it was for predator control, to dispatch injured or wounded livestock, or just to do some plinking at a tin can under a shade tree while he ate his lunch, which was a common practice in that day. My father was a competitive shooter in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and a Dominion marksman who competed in the Olympic trials in his youth. I have followed in his footsteps, becoming a competitive handgun, IPSC rifle, and shotgun competitor. I am also an avid collector, and I'm passionate about the pieces that hold significance in Canadian history and heritage. If Bill C-21 becomes law, I will be the final chapter in that book. Upon my passing, regardless of age or sentiment, my firearms will be slated for destruction. The history, the time-honored traditions, national pride, and the legacy of countless Canadian icons will come to an end. This saddens me deeply, along with countless law-abiding firearms owners who share my position. Despite proven statistics that we are one of the most vetted and law-abiding demographics in Canadian history, and our hope that the government would treat us fairly, we will unfortunately bear the brunt of these measures. It has been stated that hunters, sport shooters, collectors, firearms businesses across Canada support this bill. I can tell you now, without hesitation, that I'm a prominent member of the firearms community. From coast to coast, I have not yet come across a single firearms owner in this country who does. And in terms of firearms businesses, it's already had an impact, forcing many small, family-owned businesses to close, with more on the brink daily. It already has decreased tax revenue substantially. This bill essentially already has been in effect for nearly a year, and with no discernible impact on public safety whatsoever. Bill C-21 does nothing to address gangs, organized crime, or smuggled firearms. This explicitly and intentionally only targets law-abiding Canadians who have passed examinations, undergone training, and are vetted by the RCMP daily. It directly affects historians, recreational shooters, sportsmen, and future generations of Canadians who will no longer be able to participate in this part of our Canadian heritage. Collectors, Indigenous hunters, and Olympians are not the societal problem. Our time-honored tradition of marksmen will never represent our country again internationally. The statistics are clear and undeniable. Handgun crime involving legally possessed, registered handguns is less than 1%. These numbers have been proven to be skewed with statistics in Canada, including adding air guns, replica firearms, power tools, and in some instances, even written threats being added to the official definition of a crime gun. causing data to be significantly higher. The formation of a Firearms Advisory Committee allows a small, one-sided group of individuals to form opinions and make decisions without review or due process. This leaves new legislation open for the government to continue to ban and all firearms at will, and will continue to make law-abiding Canadians criminals overnight with a stroke of a pen. That is the very definition of government overreach. This committee has questioned witnesses as to how they would improve this bill. We must shift our focus from law-abiding Canadians to where the problem truly lies. The government must focus on organized crime, smuggled and illegally manufactured ghost guns if they hope to make any impact at all. Its goal is far from the actual problems in Canadian society, where the actual problems in Canadian society lie. The bill simply erodes our trust in the government and punishes a community of proud, law-abiding Canadians. If this bill becomes law and all the historical pieces, heirlooms, and sport pistols are destroyed forever, and with no discernible change in public safety, you can all come back to the table and try another approach. But the irreversible damage to our community will have already been done. Thank you, and I will be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Igercich. We'll now proceed to questions. Our panel finishes today at 1:30 p.m. and as with the last panel, I will limit each question, including the answer, to 4 minutes, and I will hold up this card to indicate that 30 seconds remain in your time. Please keep your questions succinct and identify the person you are addressing the question to. I offer the first question to our Deputy Chair, Senator Dagenet.
Alors, merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur Giltaca, ma question va être pour vous. Et j'ai déjà posé cette question à d'autres témoins. La désignation des armes d'assaut dans ce projet de loi, encore une fois, m'apparaît très ambiguë. Surtout lorsqu'on nous montre des armes qui se retrouvent généralement entre les mains des militaires ou des policiers qui sont formés, eux autres, pour des opérations risquées. J'aimerais donc connaître votre point de vue sur ces armes qui n'ont définitivement pas l'air de fusils, quant à moi, ou de carabines de chasse. Mais à quoi servent ces armes? Qui sont ceux qui vont les acheter? Et pourquoi vouloir en posséder plutôt que de s'acheter des armes de chasse qui sont plus conventionnelles?
Thank you for your question. The firearms community in Canada is not all about hunting. There's a lot of hunters, but there are a lot of target shooters. There's around 650,000 Canadians that have a, sorry, I'm talking too fast probably for translation. There's around 650,000 Canadians who are licensed to own handguns and rifles like AR-15s. So that's far more Canadians than play organized hockey in Canada. It's a very big community, but it's a community that keeps to itself because it doesn't want situations like what's happening right now to them. So people own firearms for a variety of different reasons. Sport shooting is a big passion, and that's why you would own certain firearms that might look more military than others. But at the end of the day, a semi-automatic rifle, whether it's used for hunting or it has plastic on it, or a sling or what have you for target shooting, it's the same rifle. And this is what keeps getting lost. They're exactly the same rifle that can be used for interchangeable purposes. AR-15s are used for hunting all the time in jurisdictions where they're legal to be used for hunting. It's just another semi-automatic rifle. And that's something I think that we need to dispel, this myth about semi-autos that have plastic on them or other accessories.
Mais est-ce qu'il existe des alternatives à ces armes pour les chasseurs et pour les amateurs de tir? Parce que vous parlez des fois des armes là, qui ont ce qu'on appelle des chargeurs, mais vous savez qu'en dévissant juste une vis, on peut ajouter plus que 5 balles. Vous savez que ça se fait, ça, je veux dire. Mais est-ce qu'il existe des alternatives à ces armes-là pour les chasseurs?
Well, the problem is, and this actually goes back to the problem of trying to regulate magazine capacity. You can 3D print a magazine, and you just need a spring. Criminals will circumvent these laws no matter what. You know, I'll give you a great example, and I'm going to try to make it quick. The Danforth shooting, terrible, one of the darkest days in Canadian history. Well, the Danforth shooter had a handgun that was stolen, apparently, from a gun store in Saskatchewan. What what people are saying was a legal gun. That's true. But he got that gun from his brother, who was in organized crime. And when his brother was arrested, well, he was in a coma, but when he was arrested, he had possession of an AK-47, a rifle, semi-automatic rifle that had been banned for 30 years in this country. The point is, can we justify doing this to 650,000 Canadians? And what public safety benefit are we at least likely to get out of it? That's the real argument, in my opinion.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Brief clarification. While I'd love to be here with you until 1:30, we in fact do finish at 11 a.m. this morning. So the next question goes to Senator Cardozo, to be followed by Senators Couture, Boisvenu, Platt, Saint-Germain, Beam, Dasco and Pate. Senator Cardozo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and gentlemen, thank you for coming here today. And some of you have had the chance to follow our hearings. We appreciate that. My sense is your three organizations are perhaps the three most preeminent organizations in the field of firearms rights and sports arms and ammunition associations. So you've been working on these issues for many years, so we thank you for coming here today. Could you give me a sense of the similarities and differences between the three organizations in terms of what your focus is, and are some of the members the same, or do you focus on different members? And my sense is certainly Canadian sporting, you would be more sporting organized, but I wonder if you could just give us a little bit of background on how you're similar and how you're different.
I can start that answer. Thank you for the question, Senator. Our two organizations are aligned and moving in the same direction as far as firearms go. Mr. Winkel's organization, my organization, and Mr. Giltaca's organizations are end user groups. Mr. Winkel's group is an industry group. That's where the difference lies. But I think as far as our organizations, we're moving in the same direction and have the same thoughts and have the same aspirations for our organization.
So could you just clarify industry versus end user? Who are we talking about there? Is that producers and purchasers?
The CCFR and the NFA, we're end user groups. Our members are shooters, hunters, collectors, sport shooters. Mr. Winkel's organization represents industry, gun shops, wholesalers, retailers, etc.
Anything else to add from the others?
I think that Mr. Igercich explained it correctly. In our organization, it's a big tent. We have hunters, we have handgun owners, we have competitive rifle shooters, and I think the reason why we've grown dramatically is because to be able to legally own and use firearms in Canada, it's been going on since before Canada was a country, and it's something that is very highly valued, and people that have firearms license are very proud of their status as trusted citizens, and they don't want to be held responsible for the acts of criminals. So that's why organizations like ours exist.
So you mentioned earlier 650,000 licensed handgun owners. Would they be members of your organization, or would they be members of theirs?
Well, it's not compulsory that they're members.
No,
it's all voluntary.
And just to follow up on that, a lot of members have cross memberships. They belong to our organization, to Mr. Giltaca's organization, and also there's another smaller organization in Canada. A lot of members have memberships to all three of these organizations.
And then there are provincial organizations?
No, they're national organizations.
But do you have provincial members?
No, Canada's National Firearms Association is a national organization. All our members are spread out across the country in every province, and we have directors in every province.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Winkel, did you have anything to add?
Yes, all I wanted to add was that we also represent the manufacturers in Canada, and we represent people that are only employed in the industry. So the 45,000 tax-paying people that are employed and their direct livelihoods depend on this industry.
And to what extent are guns in Canada manufactured in Canada?
We have manufactured firearms in Canada in every category, but the largest manufacturer is Savage Arms, and that's in a rural area outside of Peterborough. But that's the largest manufacturer, but we have manufacturing all across Canada.
Thank you. Thanks very much. We now move to Senator Couture.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, gentlemen, for being here. There seems to be I have two questions, and both are for everyone. There seems to be a fair amount of confusion about this bill. I have frequently heard that Bill C-21 will take away long guns from law-abiding Canadians. Yet amendments from the House of Commons on this issue were withdrawn. Could you please clarify from us, are there any parts of this bill, to your knowledge, that would take away legally owned long guns from law-abiding Canadians?
Would you like to go ahead?
Who would you like to answer?
All three, yeah.
Go ahead, Rick.
There is amendments in this bill that do address long guns, and the Evergreen Amendment, for one, is a definition that the government put on a long gun to call it an assault-type weapon. A couple things. A firearm is not a weapon. It's only a weapon when it's used as a weapon. And the definitions and the open end of this bill, especially with the Firearms Advisory Committee, could add any firearm after the fact, and it does significantly affect some firearms that are out there at the present time. I could provide a list to the Senate of these firearms, but I don't have the list at hand right now.
So some firearms are prohibited because of the 10,000 joule limitation. I believe that's still in the bill. And of course, all future firearms that fit that definition. So as the government continually bans firearms that already exist, there's no way for the industry to respond by saying, well, okay, well, maybe this one will meet the definition. Maybe this one will substitute for sport shooting or for hunting, where semi-automatic is appropriate. So it limits the future viability of sport shooting, and at some level hunting, but more sport shooting. It's more targeted at that.
I think it's important to reiterate the creation of the Canadian Firearms Advisory Committee may be another tool that the government may use in the future to prohibit long arms. With the amendment that was withdrawn, the government clearly showed their intent with this bill initially. That amendment was withdrawn, but the creation of the Firearms Advisory Committee could be very dangerous to the industry, as many long arms could be prohibited in the future.
If I understand you correctly, and please correct me if I'm incorrect here, you're concerned about things that may happen in the future. I hear that. But I haven't heard from you, are there specifics in the bill that are clearly will take away long guns from law-abiding Canadians now? And if it would be very hard, because there's so many things in the bill. If nothing comes to mind immediately, would you be willing to just jot down a sense of the committee if there are specific concerns about the bill that actually will take away long guns from law-abiding Canadians? Great, thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Couch. Senator Boisvenu.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Alors, bienvenue à nos témoins encore, puis merci pour vos explications relativement claires. Ma question est pour vous, Monsieur Giltaca. Moi, j'ai été gestionnaire des agents de la paix au Québec pendant une quinzaine d'années. Et les agents de la paix qui étaient sous ma supervision, c'était des agents de conservation de la faune. Donc, il y avait un statut d'agent de la paix. Il y avait le port d'armes, parce qu'évidemment, ces gens-là travaillent en forêt et ils doivent se protéger. À chaque année, ils devaient se classifier à un certain degré de performance pour pouvoir porter leur arme. Sinon, il était interdit de porter une arme s'ils ne se classifiaient pas. Et les agents de toutes les régions du Québec, il y en a à peu près 400 à 500, vont dans les champs de tir privés pour se classifier. Et moi, ce qui me frappait d'un témoignage, c'est que ce projet de loi-là va mettre en question l'existence même de ces champs-là, parce qu'ils n'auront plus de clientèle pour aller les fréquenter. Et sûrement, ce n'est pas juste les agents de la paix ou les policiers qui vont faire vivre ces champs de tir-là. Est-il vrai que demain, ce projet de loi-là qui est adopté tel quel, si on ne le modifie pas, que ces champs de tir-là risquent de disparaître et que les agents de la paix qui doivent se classifier n'auront pas d'endroit pour se classifier et on met en question le droit de porter une arme pour leur travail? Est-ce que cette situation-là est bien décrite?
That is an absolute real concern. So right now, if you are licensed to own a handgun, if you have a handgun or an AR-15 or other restricted rifle or shotgun, you must be a member of a shooting club.
Ou un individu normal, là. Parce que le policier a un droit de porter une arme. Donc, on vise aussi bien les policiers que les hommes de commerçants qui auraient le droit de port d'armes.
Okay, so an authorization to carry does exist in Canada, but it's my understanding that there's one private citizen that has an authorization to carry. It's not, that's something that is not given out to basically anyone.
Mais pour les agents de la paix, cette situation-là risque de se produire où il n'y aura plus d'endroit pour aller se classifier. Est-ce que c'est la réalité?
Absolutely, because clubs across the country rely on handgun owners and owners of AR-15s and other restricted rifles as compulsory members of these clubs to keep them alive. That's where their main income comes from, and that's why I say it will probably be more than 700 clubs that will be dissolved because of this over time.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Senator Boivin. Senator Platt.
Thank you, Chair. Senator Kuchar and I, as a distinct possibility, we might vote differently on this bill at the end, but we do agree on one thing, that there is a lot of confusion. The government, in 2020, the government arbitrarily decided to ban about 1,500 styles of firearm, and it said it will pay compensation to people for losing their guns. We have yet to see any of that money, but the parliamentary budget officer has estimated the cost to be about $750 million. So I would like a perspective from you gentlemen on clearly if you are one of the people that loses a firearm because of that and you get paid whatever, $1,500 or $2,000, I have no idea what a gun costs, you can simply take that money and go out and buy another firearm that is also a semi-automatic and may in fact shoot the same ammunition. I would like your perspective on the consistency of the government's plan to eradicate us of all firearms here, which seems to be their long-range goal, and yet they're buying something from you, they're giving you money in order to go and buy another gun.
Well, why would a firearm owner replace a firearm? I mean, when that ban happened, I bought a replacement firearm because that's what the Attorney General of Canada was saying. Oh, we're only banning this group, you can buy an acceptable one. So I spent $1,400 2 weeks later to replace my AR-15s that were... $1,500. Yeah, and guess what? The RCMP banned that gun while it was in transit to me. I guess they think that's funny.
Yeah.
Right?
And to delve deeper into that, Senator, the fact of the matter is you can replace that firearm basically with the exact same firearm. The only difference is instead of plastic furniture, it has wood furniture on it. So you're basically replacing one firearm with the exact same firearm that looks different. And in Ms. Freeland's opinion, it doesn't look scary. That's the big difference right there.
This might be good for Mr. Winkel because he's selling a lot more guns because of the bans.
In theory, that's the thought process, but like Mr. Giltaca mentioned, is that there's a lot of consumer apprehension at this point that the government of Canada is going to allow them to keep any of their firearms. It's very hard for them to continue to invest money in things that continually get prohibited. And it's very hard to get our manufacturers to get on board to get compliant models designed and manufactured for our country when 6 months later a committee just goes ahead and prohibits them down the road. So yes, in theory, people would like to replace them and may be able to at that exact time. But consumers only have so much hard-earned money to spend, and they're concerned about their investment in the future.
Fair enough. Very briefly, if I could, and I'm sorry for picking on Senator Kuchar here today, but it's one of those days. Senator Kuchar did quote a recent American study at a different committee meeting where he said, we find strong, consistent evidence supporting the hypothesis that restrictive state gun policies reduce overall gun deaths, homicides committed with a gun, and suicides committed with a gun. What he didn't read from that same study is the following. Results show that background checks and waiting periods for a gun purchase are strongly associated with lower gun death rates. Background checks, prohibited possessor laws, and waiting periods are all associated with lower gun homicide rates. And background checks, waiting periods, and safety training requirements are associated with lower gun suicide rates. Can you confirm for me that Canada already has all of these controls in place? including background checks, waiting periods, prohibited possessor laws, and safety training requirements?
Yes, they do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Platt. We now go to Senator Saint-Germain.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci à vous trois pour vos témoignages qui nous apportent une perspective éclairante. Ma première question va à Monsieur Giltaca. Vous avez indiqué que vous étiez déçu du manque d'assurance. Vous avez utilisé en anglais le mot évidence, donc le manque de preuves concrètes reçues ou que vous a donné le gouvernement et la Gendarmerie royale du Canada pour démontrer qu'avec un tel projet de loi, la sécurité publique serait vraiment améliorée. Si vous étiez le ministre ou responsable de la Gendarmerie royale du Canada, qu'est-ce que vous pourriez fournir comme preuve additionnelle réalistement? Qu'est-ce que vous attendez du ministre et de la Gendarmerie concrètement?
Great question. Thank you. So I think if you want to make thoughtful policy, first you have to figure out what the problem is. The problem is violence. I mean, a good question would be to the RCMP and the government, how many licensed gun owners that possess the firearms we're all talking about are involved in violent crime at any level? That is a very easy thing for them to find out because we're tracked more than any other private citizen in the country. They would easily know that. I sat here during the hearings for Bill C21. Nobody had that number. Today, they still don't have that number. How many licensed gun owners are accused of murder? How many of the 260 murders a year have a licensed gun owner behind that firearm? We don't have that number. So first you have to figure out who's doing the shooting. You have to figure out how they're incentivized and how you can stop them. So if it's 10% of crime is committed by licensed gun owners, I want to know that. I want to know that as a citizen. And if it is 10%, then 10% of this bill should be looking at the licensing system. And if it's 90% unlicensed people, 90% of it should be looking at the sources of violence. This is all we're asking as a group is just for a reasonable approach. Thank you.
So you want more evidence-based data?
Absolutely.
Si je peux, Monsieur le Président, une supplémentaire pour Monsieur Winkel. Monsieur Winkel, vous avez souhaité une approche qui serait davantage équilibrée entre les besoins et les intérêts de l'industrie et ceux de la sécurité publique. Vous considérez que le projet de loi n'atteint pas cet équilibre entre les deux perspectives. J'aimerais vous entendre davantage sur qu'est-ce qui pourrait vous satisfaire et qui apporterait un meilleur équilibre entre les intérêts, les impératifs de l'industrie et ceux de la sécurité publique. Évidemment, au-delà de la lutte contre le crime organisé, M. Igercich y a fait référence, mais au-delà de la lutte contre le crime organisé, quels seraient ces éléments manquants qui permettraient cet équilibre que vous souhaitez?
If you could, Mr.
Yes, what's missing is just a strategy to deal with crime guns. What's in the bill is a strategy to destroy our industry. Our industry, like has been stated before, represents less than 3% of firearms that are used in crime in Canada. 100% of the bill attacks our industry and doesn't attack the other 97%. We need an approach that attacks crime in Canada and does not destroy the jobs of our employees.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Senator Beam, over to you.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here. Very interesting testimony. My question is for you, Mr. Giltaca. And your website prominently promotes a letter submitted to this committee by a group of academics which calls itself the Magnificent Seven. Great movie in its day, by the way. Members of which we heard from last week. So my question is really based on that letter. Regarding the provisions in C21 on emergency prohibition orders, the letter CCFR evidently agrees with refers to these orders as redundant because law enforcement can already confiscate firearms from individuals who pose a threat, more difficult to use due to the implementation of anonymous complaints to the courts, and dangerous because of the perceived threat of abuse. Now, women's and victims groups that we've also heard from in this committee including Police Souvient, are opposed to the ex parte provision, which would provide victims and potential victims the option to make an application to a court for an emergency weapons prohibition order because they feel it puts the onus on victims to do the job of enforcing the law. But these groups are also strongly supportive of the automatic prohibition on gun ownership for any individual subject to a protection order related to domestic violence or stalking, in addition to mandatory license revocation for anyone perpetrating domestic violence. So my question is, and in the interest of, we've all talked about balance here and trying to hear from everyone, what does the CCFR say to victims of gun violence, several of whom we've heard from, as I mentioned, and especially victims of domestic and family violence who believe that the measures in this bill, aside from the anonymous court petitions, are a step in the right direction towards protecting victims of gun violence and domestic and family violence?
Well, as an organization, we don't oppose any measure that protects victims of domestic violence. It's completely unacceptable to begin with. No one's arguing against that whatsoever. I'm not an expert in protection orders or domestic violence, but we're in favor of any measure that helps protect people from domestic violence. But we also have to be cognizant. I mean, my only reservation is we have to make sure that you and I don't get into an argument someday. You make an anonymous call to I don't know where, and next thing you know, ERT is at my door, and I'm wondering what's going on, and then I don't even get to talk to a judge or whatever, and my firearms are taken, my home is searched. You know, the abuse aspect of that is real. So, and you know, it's up to your committee to figure out how to strike that balance. But yeah, I agree that we should do everything we possibly can while considering the abuse part, because that can destroy lives too. So,
would you agree that this bill is a step in the right direction?
Well, I don't. As I said, I'm not an expert in protection orders or domestic violence, so it's very hard for me to comment on that. But I'm looking at having a safer Canada, because I want a safer Canada too. I have a daughter. I don't want her to fall victim to these things either. But it has to strike the right balance, and I can't tell you what that balance is.
Any of your colleagues want to comment on this?
I think the way the bill is written, I think, in my opinion, it doesn't go to the root cause. I think the shift should be made more towards domestic violence, not so much. In my opinion, this bill does nothing to prevent domestic violence. You know, we've heard from several witnesses on this committee, and you know, the guns always come up, but the statistics show that other items are used for domestic violence besides firearms. You know, I heard several witnesses say, well, people feel threatened in their household because their spouse has a gun. Well, are they less threatened because there's a big, sharp, pointed knife in the kitchen? You know, this bill, this bill does not address domestic violence. This bill only, in my opinion, takes firearms out of the hands of law-abiding Canadians.
Senator Dasco is next, followed by Senator Pate, and I have Senators Kuchar and Platt on for the second round. Senator Dasco.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Giltaca, I have a question for you. I did watch your video. I found it very interesting. I think I received probably 300 emails with your video, but I only watched it once. So I wanted to ask you about just some of the material on your website. And do you believe that Canadians have the right to own guns? And what do you have to say about the successive Supreme Court rulings that say the opposite?
Well, I didn't, this comes up a lot. Obviously, I came here to talk about Bill C21, not about the CCFR, so I'll try to keep it brief. But I hear that a lot. I didn't name our organization. I came in after. So the Supreme Court has determined in some cases that there are no actual rights to own firearms. And as an organization, we think that there is a significant problem in our legal structure in Canada where you can't have a right to own private property. So that's where we really focus. The handguns, which is what I'm really here to talk about most, those are private property. They were legally obtained, used safely and legally every day across the country. and this bill aims to take that property away with no compensation by force, with no demonstrable benefit to public safety. So that's what I'm concerned with.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, another thing that I wanted to mention is that the list of your policies on your website says that concealed or open carrying of firearms would be a significant benefit to society. Now, I have to ask you about this because, if this is the direction we would be going, I wonder if you think that Canadians would agree with that, and do you think that's a direction that this country should be going in?
Well, again, our website, I don't think, is the topic of the discussion around Bill C21, but I'll address your question. The policies that we have on our website are opinions that we've looked into based on research. Now, as an organization, are we actively lobbying for concealed carry in Canada? It's not a reality to anybody. We don't think it's a reality. But gun owners, before becoming a part of our organization, will want to know, like, what's your position on this? And it's like, well, research says that concealed carry is a benefit to public safety, and that's not actually controversial. It is in Canada in the national conversation, but yeah, we're actively trying to save our handguns from being prohibited right now.
Yes, but do you think this is the direction we should be going in?
We don't have a position on that other than our position on the idea of that. That's not what we're asking for.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Pate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of you for being here. I have one specific question and then general questions. So the first question is for you, Mr. Giltaca. One of the areas of this bill that it focuses on is the possession and accessing of computer data that would allow the illegal manufacturing of ghost guns, or the distribution or publishing of data to manufacture ghost guns. I won't ask you about your group's position because you're saying that you're here talking about C21. Are you opposed to that particular provision of this bill?
Well, that's hard to say because as a licensed gun owner, I'm opposed to ghost guns existing altogether. It's a real problem. They're untraceable, they're fully functional, they're durable.
So you would support this provision?
Well, to be honest with you, I don't know enough. What a lot of people have on this topic have compared it to is our laws that deal with child pornography.
Right.
What kind of investigation does it take to find out what's on someone's computer?
Right.
So I'm not an expert in those matters, but I will say I'm in absolute favor of any reasonable, rational measure that we can come up with that will deal with ghost guns, because those are a threat to public safety.
Okay, so you're...
I just don't know enough about it to.
Okay, so I'll leave that then. All of you have talked about your membership, and I'm curious what kind of screening you do for your members. So the issue of violence against women, intimate partner violence, domestic violence, whatever name you want to use, we know what the issue is. We know it's been characterized as epidemic in this country, and we know that the majority of those cases don't go reported. But I heard a bit disturbing view that you're concerned about false reporting. In fact, we know quite the opposite. There's not a lot of false reporting. There's a lot of diminishing of the victim's voice when they do come forward. So I'm curious what each of your organizations do to screen to ensure that the individual, and we know that criminalization is the last step for those who engage in intimate partner violence. So what screening do you do to ensure that you don't have people coming in who might be waving guns around or threatening their partners or doing that? How do you assess that?
As far as screening, Canada is a free and open country. We're a non-for-profit organization, and we offer memberships. Most of our members are firearms owners that have a possession acquisition license, so they are screened and vetted by the RCMP on a daily basis. But we do have some members that aren't firearms owners. We have some members that are personal property rights people. But as far as, according to the Canadian Charter, anybody can join an organization. We don't hand out firearms. We don't give people the means to carry out any kind of criminal act. We're a lobby group, and our members are entitled to join any organization they want. according to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
So maybe I can add to that for all of you then. Do you support other measures like the recommendation, the calls for justice of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and many of the inquests that have been done into the deaths of women through intimate partner violence for better social, economic, and health supports?
Absolutely. For public safety, absolutely.
Could you send copies of those positions that your organizations have put forth for us so that we could have them for the committee?
Well, we don't have a position
We don't have
on other topics other than firearm related issues.
We're firearms lobby groups. We don't take positions on those items or any other items. You know, as far as what else goes on in Canada, we're a firearms organization, and we stick our focus. Our focus stays on firearms and firearms rights in Canada.
Okay, so that would be true for all of you.
Yes, with the exception of ours, we only represent licensed businesses, which again are all licensed by the RCMP and vetted by the RCMP. So our focus is on defending the employment of our industry.
Okay, thank you.
Move on. We have two more Senators Kuchera and Plett, 3 minutes each because we're now tight for time. Senator Plett, Senator Kuchera, over to you first.
Thank you very much, Chair. And for the record, the bromance between Senator Plett and I continues. Just to be clear, Senator Plett, that study showed that the United States was moving in the right direction. The gun suicide rate in the United States is second only to Greenland globally, and your staff can look up Rafeman 2020 to show that if the U.S. and Canada had similar rates of firearm ownership, 64% fewer firearm suicides in the U.S. We heard concerns about the lack of solid data to answer many of the questions we have about guns and gun violence. Do you have specific recommendations that you could make? And if you can't say them right now, you can write them down and send them to us. Yeah. That would improve the quality and quantity of gun-related data in Canada.
I do, absolutely. I have 3 papers that I could put in for the record.
Them into one paper?
Well, actually, they're three independent, peer-reviewed studies, and I'd like to add them to the record.
Great, that'd be great. If the rest of you have specific recommendations, we'd really love to see them. Please, yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Plett.
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, my question relates to the impact of this bill on the future of gun control in Canada. I think we are safe in saying that if gun control in Canada is going to be effective, it must have the support of legal firearms owners, or it will just simply never be effective. And it is obvious that legal firearms owners are opposed to this iteration of this bill. How concerned are you that bills like this, which are so widely viewed as flawed, risk undermining the support for gun control? And for the sake of time, I'll quickly add this. How concerned are you that provisions in this bill, specifically the freeze on the sale and purchase of otherwise legal handguns, will drive some of these otherwise legal firearms underground? Mr. Giltaca first, and then.
Well, I think I addressed this in my opening statement. I mean, this is a culture of exceptionally responsible individuals in our society that has existed for 100 years when it comes to handguns. It's a generational culture, and it's a culture of safety and compliance. I personally instructed over 3,000 people in the Canadian Firearm Safety course over a 10-year period, and I spent a lot of time teaching people how important responsible firearm ownership is, and how they are obligated as representatives of our community to abide by the law, no matter how ridiculous some of them, not all of them, but some of them might be. So it's very ill received by our community. And again, at the end of the day, we're being blamed for the actions of criminals in downtown Toronto or downtown Vancouver.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Giltaca. It's very ill-received in our community also. It doesn't make any sense. The logic behind it is not sensible, in my opinion. I believe the focus is going in the wrong direction with this bill, or a lot of other firearms acts that were put into place, Order in Council being another one.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Senator Platt. Colleagues, this brings us to the end of today's meeting. I'd like to extend our sincere thanks to Mr. Giltaca, Mr. Igercich, and Mr. Winkel for the time you've taken to share your expertise with us. You are strong advocates for your communities, and I'm sure that's very much appreciated by your communities. Colleagues, we will continue our examination of this bill on Monday, November the 6th at 3 p.m. in room C128. Thank you again for your participation here today and all of your questions and your conciliatory style. And I wish you all a good afternoon. The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.